Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to the interview that I started a couple of days ago with my father and his experiences in the military. The first part I posted 2 days ago and has met with remarkable responses from you all. I want to thank everyone a ton. You all seem to really enjoy the video. I got more than 4,000 views in the first 24 hours, over 4,000 views in less than 24 hours. I'm trying to think, there may have been one or two videos that I've released that have had that kind of success, but it's been a long, long time, if anything at all, has ever had that kind of success. So thank you everyone for that. That means a lot to me. This will be part 2 in what I'm pretty confident will end up being a 4-part series of videos looking at my father's experience in the military. The interview that this is looking at is an interview I did for a college class almost 10 years ago for the Veterans History Project, which is a project put together by the Library of Congress. Before we get back into the interview, I do just want to point out there were a couple of comments from people in Europe who were kind of like, why are you talking about Congress? Is this political or what have you? And I just want to clarify a few things here. If you're not familiar with the Library of Congress, it has absolutely nothing to do with the I wouldn't say it has nothing to do with the U.S. government, but it has nothing to do with the U.S. Political system. The Library of Congress is essentially the National Museum for the United States. It's an archive. It keeps historical documents, historical items safe and secure and catalogs them so that they can be accessed and utilized by the government as well as the general public. So, again, it will keep things like historical documents safe, but they've also initiated a program called the Veterans History Project. And what that is an attempt to catalog American combat or non-combat, American military veterans' history in the military, in the armed forces. So they've initiated this program where they will catalog veterans from any branch of service, including the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Army, and they will make it available, almost public domain-like. Not quite. I think you need people's permission to use the footage. But anyway, and some of them are video interviews, some of them are audio interviews, some of them are just historical sort of military records, and the goal is to provide access to the public of what the American military personnel goes through and to catalog and save it. So that's what this interview was for. It was an interview I did with my father for a class in school, but again, it was an interview for the Library of Congress, no affiliation with the actual U.S. Congress. And anyway, I do appreciate, again, you guys showed a tremendous amount of support. I want to thank everyone for the kind words. I hope you all enjoyed the interview. Same rules apply. We're actually watching Order of Battle Pacific here on the screen. However, we're not going to be talking about that. This is the second part of the Battle of Guadalcanal, but again, we're not really going to talk about what's going on the screen. Suffice to say that I am playing as Japan and doing okay. And funny that I'm playing as Japan when I'm doing an interview for someone who served in the U.S. military for 35 years. So anyway, guys, that's enough of me rambling here. I hope you guys enjoy the interview. We're going to pick up where we left off. My father's talking about how he's in Germany, and we'll probably go for about another 30 minutes or so and see where we end up there. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview. Were there any particular incidents when you were in Germany as far as your military police role? What stood out?
Well, actually, in addition to having the planning role with Central Army Group, as I mentioned, I also had responsibility for all of the driver testing stations throughout Germany. In the driver testing stations, the United States Army ran the driver testing for all U.S. military forces in Germany, and we had about 40 stations throughout Germany, all the way from up like Kassel in the north down to Garmisch and whatever in the south. Zweibrücken on the west, and like Nuremberg on the east. So I had to go around to these various test stations and make certain that they were running their tests in a positive way. And every now and then you'd run across situations where someone was given, and of course, not only did we test the military, but we also tested their dependents who were with them in Germany. Of course, my family was with me in Germany as well. So the wives or sons and daughters of service people, we also tested them. And on occasion, we found some circumstances where the people who were running the driver testing station, and they were American soldiers, sometimes, shall we say, bent the rules a little bit to let somebody pass when they shouldn't have. And that isn't good, because we didn't want to have poor drivers on the road in Germany, because it's hard enough driving in a foreign country. At least they drove on the same side of the road that we did, which was a good thing. But we didn't want to have individuals creating incidents as a result of that. In addition, I also had a role as a planning officer with our 7th Army Provost Marshal's office in Stuttgart, and on occasion went out and worked with the unit that I had belonged to before, the 385th MP Battalion. And there were some incidents. Germany has a different set of mores, a different culture than ours. For example, houses of ill repute were authorized in Germany, and they were regularly inspected by their doctors. The women who worked in those places were inspected on a regular basis by the doctors. And of course, we as military police had to occasionally go to those places to make certain that our soldiers who were, shall we say, customers there, weren't getting out of line. And fortunately, during the period of time that I was involved there, that none of that occurred. Nothing serious, at least. There were no serious incidents. Of course, there were the occasional Gasthaus fights and that sort of thing that we got involved with, but nothing that extended beyond that. So nothing really truly serious. It was interesting to go out to the various driver testing stations, though, to go back to that, because we went to places that a lot of people don't go, sometimes to maneuver training areas. There was a place called Weilflecken, for example, that we went to, and another one called Baumholter, and a few others. And I got the opportunity to see our armor units in action, and that was kind of fun to watch, to observe. I didn't participate, but it was fun to observe.
Did you go to Berlin at all when you were?
Yes, I did. When I didn't mention this before, but when I was commanding the 385th B Company, the 385th, one of my platoons had been detached from my unit and actually operated Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. So one of my platoons of 48 men were actually stationed in Berlin, and I had to go up there. I was only commanding the unit 3 or 4 months, but I did go up there about 2 or 3 times. We took the troop train to go up there and to visit my men on Checkpoint Charlie, and it was always kind of eerie to stand in Checkpoint Charlie and look across the Berlin Wall at the East German soldiers looking back at us with their binoculars, and we were looking at them with our binoculars. And the train trip up there was always interesting too, because as we passed through East Germany, into East Germany from West Germany, there were East German troops, of course, and occasionally we had to stop for refueling or whatever on the train. And invariably, the East German soldiers would come up to us and try to trade stuff with us. Maybe they'd trade their little red star from their pile cap, and we'd give them a Zippo lighter or something like that. There was always some of that going on. So even though you were, quote, enemies, unquote, there was some camaraderie in the services that everybody seemed to recognize.
Did you, what was the troop train? You mentioned that.
Troop train is a train that was allowed to pass between West Germany and East Germany into Berlin, because U.S. forces had a position in Berlin at that point as part of the agreement with the French, the British, the Germans, and the Russians, or the East Germans, actually got involved in that. The Russians were involved in that treaty as well. And part of the agreement was to allow this troop train free passage to and from Berlin, as long as the four powers, Russia, United States, England, and France, as long as those four powers were in charge of Berlin, if you will, the troop train was going to be allowed to pass.
And Checkpoint Charlie, what was...
Checkpoint Charlie was one of the checkpoints between East and West Berlin, where people with proper documentation could go from one to the other. Usually they were diplomats, sometimes military, but the average citizen could not go back and forth, just special circumstances. So there was a gate, so to speak, or a checkpoint for people to go through.
Did you ever witness anybody trying to go through illegally?
No.
And the Berlin Wall was up at this point in time, right?
Oh, absolutely. It went up in what, 1960? No, 59 was it? I'm not sure.
All right. And was the atmosphere in Berlin different?
I'm sorry. It went up in 1961 because that's when I went on active duty.
All right. So, was the atmosphere in Berlin different than, or I'm assuming you were not in East Berlin, you were in West Berlin?
Yes.
Was the atmosphere in West Berlin different, more tense than, say, Western Germany?
I would say it was more tense among the military there because they knew they had a live mission, if you will, that could erupt into something serious. As far as the German people, I had an opportunity on occasion to do some sightseeing and do some visiting around various establishments, and the German people seemed very, very happy that the Americans were there. They seemed, far more so than down in West Germany. They seemed to be very pleased that we were there and protecting them, if you will, from the East Germans.
All right.
And they were very cordial.
Okay, that's interesting. When you left Germany, what did you do then?
Well, I was in Germany for about 2.5 years, and the Vietnam conflict had started in basically in '63, and we with advisors, and then just later on we started sending some troops in '65, I think, '64, '65, and I kind of sensed something was going on, and what happened in 1966, my 3-year tour in Germany was curtailed after 2.5 years, and I was brought back to Fort Lewis, Washington, which is near Tacoma, Washington, to help set up a new basic training center that was being established at Fort Lewis. Initially, I worked on the staff of one of the brigade commanders. A brigade is a composite of about 20 different companies that trained basic trainees, if you will. And as a result, I ended up on the staff initially, and then when the troops started coming in, and we got troops in from California for the most part, I was moved over to run one of the companies, a company called Company E, 4th Battalion, 1st Brigade.
This training now, or still
It was a basic training company. Basic training company. No, not military police at all. This is like an infantry assignment almost. And the first unit of mine that came through was a group of National Guard individuals from Northern California around the San Francisco area. And most of them had joined the National Guard to get out of being on active duty, to be quite honest. And if you remember, in those years, there was somewhat of a hippie movement going on, and many of the recruits that came in were not prepared really for Army life at all. I mean, many of them had very long hair, and which had to be clipped down to a reasonable length. And one individual in particular was always interesting to me, and I always remember him. Leland Rene Osage Quinn was his name. He was actually brought into the basic training center, into the reception area, by the FBI because he had refused to report. And of course, they brought him in, and he took the oath. Either take the oath or go to jail back in those years, and I don't know if that still prevails or not. But nonetheless, he did that, and he was brought in, and he did take the oath under duress, I might add. They shaved his head off, of course, and naturally he was assigned to my company. Everybody heard about him, even though there were about 40 or so basic training companies by that time at Fort Lewis. He ended up assigned to my company. And I had a thing called Commander's Time. Every Tuesday evening, troops from my basic training unit could come in and talk to me about anything they wanted to talk about. And every Tuesday, the first person in line, the first man in line was Leland Rene Osage Quinn. And actually, I got to like the guy. He was pretty interesting. He was pretty smart. What was really interesting is when we went out to the rifle range, he was one of the best shots on the rifle range. But his physical state was very bad. I mean, the guy had been on marijuana, and he'd never really taken care of his body at all. And after about 4 weeks, it was quite obvious that he was never going to pass the physical training requirements to get through basic training. So he had to be what's called recycled, which means he was put back a few weeks, kind of like being demoted in school. He was put back a few weeks, and he was put in a special training company where they concentrate on building up the physical needs of the individuals, whatever they might be. So I didn't really see him any longer. And another interesting incident that occurred with another individual, I remember, let's just call him Michael, I don't want to use his last name. We were out on bivouac, which means we were out in tents in the field for 3 days. And I was out, just kind of walking through the bivouac area, and this fellow was kind of laying outside of, and the men had pup tents, little, small two-man tents. And he was kind of laying on the ground outside of his tent, and I said, I used his last name, but I said, Michael, what's going on? And he looked up to me and he said, Captain Flanagan, are you my real dad? I said, oh no, what is this? So one of my sergeants, one of my drill sergeants, Sergeant Smith, who was a great guy, came up and kind of got the guy moving. I mean, he didn't hurt him or anything. He just got him back into his tent. And then he just kept acting up. So I said, you better take him back into to the main part of Fort Lewis, which he did. And the guy started acting up. So they ended up putting him in confinement in the stockade, if you will, on an overnight basis, just to see if he, kind of get his head together, if you will, because we sensed, because we had seen him before, that there was nothing really wrong with the guy. He just was kind of, I guess the word is malingering a little bit. So at any rate, he was in there for a couple of days. We got him out. I called his dad and talked to his dad, his real dad, by the way. And I brought him up to Fort Lewis from Northern California. And the three of us met, and actually, what was interesting, he kind of straightened out at that point. And even though, because he missed about a week or two of training at that point because of his confinement, he had to be recycled as well. But he went back to another training company that was in an earlier cycle. And had he not had confinement, he would have been the outstanding graduate for that company. I mean, the guy turned into a really good soldier. So you never know what's going on inside of people's heads and what's motivating them. But I had the pleasure of commanding this National Guard unit that when they came up and we got onto the rifle range, they set the record, the marksmanship record on the marksmanship range. And as long as I was at Fort Lewis, which was about 11 months, that record still stood. So I was very proud of that. And our National Guard guys performed really well for the most part. And but then after 11 months, I was notified that I was going to Vietnam. And so that's when in May of 1968, excuse me, 67, I ended up shipping over to Vietnam.
Before you go into the
Yeah.
Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
so this was a regular Army unit training National Guard units?
Training all recruits, not just National Guard units. I happen to have a National Guard unit as my first unit through. I had actually 3 different cycles, but it was kind of fun. I mean, I got in great shape at the time. I mean, one of the things we did, for example, we did what's called a 12-mile speed march, which means you march in full pack at a high rate of speed. And I was able to make that full 12 miles, not only with my pack, but marching backwards. And I would go up and down the line and provide some, let's call it leadership, or let's call it an example for my men that if the old man can do this, I can do it, type of thing. And it seemed to work, and it really was kind of fun to do. I enjoyed doing that sort of stuff.
All right. And interesting, was there any kind of ill will? I know it was just a training base, but was there any ill will between National Guard, Reserve, and regular?
Actually, there was very little relationship between the units. Each unit kind of operated on its own. You very seldom dealt with the other units. We had our own mess hall. We had our own barracks. I had a drill sergeant who slept on each floor of the barracks. And, the weapons were kept in the barracks. They weren't loaded, of course. But our guys actually practiced shooting, dry firing, if you will. No, in other words, firing without any bullets. In their barracks, they would practice what we call brass: breathe, relax, aim, slack, squeeze, which is how you learn to fire a rifle. And it was no, we had very little relationship with any of the other units. We had our own company area, and we really had very little to do with the other units. There was some competition from a score point of view. In other words, how well they did on the physical training test, how well they did in the marksmanship test, etc. But no real direct relationship at all.
And so now you're notified that you're going to Vietnam.
Right. Yeah, and of course my family was with me in Fort Lewis. I had a wife and 2 children there, and which I had in Germany as well. But my wife's family at the time, she was from North Carolina, and decided that the best thing for her to do was to probably go back and be near her family. So we decided we bought a home in near Raleigh, North Carolina, and so I moved the family back there, and that's where they stayed while I was in Vietnam.
What? Not to have ignored your family. Did they enjoy being in Germany when you were in Germany? Or?
I think they did. The kids were pretty young then. Patrick and Aaron were pretty young at that point in time. And they had a good time. They got a chance to mingle with German people, and then they had a good time doing that. They went to school there. Of course, we had U.S. schools. My wife wasn't as happy, to be honest. We had some neat things, like we had a maid. That was kind of cool, who lived upstairs from us. But she didn't seem to enjoy it as much. She was more of a family person, and missed not being near her family.
Right. Okay, so you moved the family to North Carolina,
right,
and you're going to Vietnam.
I went to Vietnam. I flew out of Travis Air Force Base near San Francisco. There was a charter flight run by Braniff Airlines at the time. Excuse me, Continental Airlines at the time. And we flew from there to Hawaii. My first touchdown, first and only time I've ever actually been in Hawaii. And we were only there for a few hours for the plane to refuel and whatever. And then we flew from there to Okinawa, and at Clark Air Force Base in Okinawa. And then from Clark Air Force Base, we flew into Ben Hoa Air Base, which is north of Saigon, or as it's called now, Ho Chi Minh City, but I'll refer to it as Saigon because that's what it was at the time, about 40 miles north. So we flew into Ben Hoa, and bear in mind this was kind of in the middle of summer, May, late May actually. And you step out of the plane, and there's this oppressive, I mean, you didn't know what to expect, of course. You didn't know if bullets would be flying or what would be going on, but we did hear in the distance some anti-aircraft, and not anti-aircraft, but some artillery going off in the distance. But nothing, no bullets were flying at that point in time. And the oppressive heat was just hard to describe. It just completely overwhelmed you. I mean, we were in fatigues, and immediately you were doused in sweat. It was just so exceptionally hot. So we were moved into a little reception area at Ben Hoa Air Base, and I ended up staying there for 3 days. And the reason for that, and of course, it was kind of spooky because you hear the artillery going all night long. Fortunately, nothing was incoming; it was all outgoing. But I was assigned, according to my orders, to a unit that was in Saigon called the 716th Military Police Battalion. So I was going to go into a military police role. But for whatever reason, and I was a fairly senior captain at that point in time, so senior in rank. In other words, I'd been in rank a few years. And
do you have assignment preference if you've been a captain for a long time?
No, you don't have any preference. They tell you where you're going to go. So I was supposed to go to this unit in the 716th MP Battalion, but for whatever reason, they didn't move me there. So instead, they ended up bringing me over to I guess you might call it a constructed city, a military city called Long Bin. And I was put in there as what's called the adjutant, or the S1, in other words, the chief administrative officer of the 89th Military Police Group. The 89th Military Police Group was a unit that had about 4 military police battalions assigned to it throughout Vietnam, actually from about midpoint in Vietnam down to the bottom of the Mekong Delta, in other words, the whole southern half of the country. There were 2 military police groups in Vietnam. The 89th group was down in the south, and there was another group to the north. So I was the adjutant, assigned as the adjutant as a captain. And I served in that role, and one of my other roles was to be the commander of what's called the headquarters and headquarters detachment of that group, which was all of the administrative people assigned to that unit were assigned to me as I was their commander. But after about 6 months, matter of fact, it was as of September of 1967, I was getting, as I said, fairly senior as a captain. I was concerned that I wasn't going to have an opportunity to command a unit in a combat zone, which of course Vietnam was. And so I began politicking, for lack of a better word, to get a unit in Vietnam.
How do you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, you talk to people, you just say you have an interest in doing that, you really enjoy doing that, hopefully you could do that before you get promoted, that sort of thing. And just let people know, without being too ridiculous about it, let people know that you have an interest.
Everyday conversation with your superiors?
Not every day, but I mean every now and then, with your superior, even with your friends, because your friends talk to other people and that sort of thing. So our commander at that time was a fellow named Julian LePage, Frank LePage, good guy, or Julian LePage, I said Frank LePage. Frank Payne was later on, I'll get to him. But Julian LePage was our commander at the time, a full colonel, and he saw an opening came up. One of the commanders of the units in a place called Vung Tau was being moved because he'd been in his assignment 6 months, and that was the normal tour as a commander in Vietnam, was 6 months. A fellow named Frank Lang, excuse me.
All right. Well, I hate to jump in right there once again, but we're at about the 30-minute mark, so I think it would make sense to split this video up. And we're also kind of at a natural stopping point. We're just at the start of my father talking about his experiences in Vietnam. He obviously mentioned that he volunteered for Vietnam, but this is just getting into the very beginning of his tour in Vietnam. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this part of the video, and there will be a third part that will be coming out shortly that will detail his experiences in Vietnam. We've got about an hour left of the interview. So we'll just continue playing over the Order of Battle Pacific footage with the interview itself. And why don't you guys feel free to leave comments and what have you in the description. If you do have any questions, feel free to go ahead and leave those as well. Shoot me an email at historicalgamer@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at historicalgamer. Or just leave a comment in the thread here. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you tuning in and hope you enjoyed. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.